it's then moved into this vesicle by means of a proton, I'm going to guess, antiport system.
Page 50.
So by means of a proton antiport system, acetylcholine is accumulated into these vesicles, so that's recycled. The calcium that came in here into this cell is pumped out by means of a P-class pump. The calcium that came out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum here in the muscle cell, that's a lot of calcium. That calcium is put back into that sarcoplasmic reticulum by means of a P-class pump. Okay, the sarcoplasmic reticulum of the muscle cell you can think of is like the ER of the muscle cell. Okay, I think we're going to have this in words. And this is basically the same, but here we have everything in words, you need to know both. So what is the series of events? We can think about what happens before the synapse and after the synapse. Before the synapse, that's in the neuron, we call that presynaptic. So we have an action potential. Calcium channels open as a consequence. Calcium flows in the cytosol. That calcium causes the fusion of synaptic vesicles, which were ready. They fuse with the plasma membrane, PM, plasma membrane, that's the cell membrane. The fusion of the vesicle leads to a release of neurotransmitter into the synapse, into that synaptic cleft. The neurotransmitter is acetylcholine, diffuses, it binds the receptor. Then we're in the receiving cell, now we're postsynaptic. So postsynaptic, the receptor is hit by the neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter is the ligand, and that ligand-gated channel, that's a receptor, opens now to sodium. Sodium flow leads to depolarization, that leads to voltage-gated sodium channel opening. So there's voltage-gated here. I ran out of space. I'm going to keep it large. That sodium flow causes the depolarization of the entire muscle membrane. That leads to calcium channel opening by means of a complicated mechanism. It involves places of close contact between the sarcoplasmic reticulum and the plasma membrane in the muscle cell. Calcium is released, that causes muscle contraction. That involves molecules that we'll see later called actin and myosin. Those are big proteins. Okay, then a pump, a P-class pump, at the expense of ATP, moves the calcium back into the ER, and this cell returns to a resting state. The membrane potential returns to a resting state in both cells because of potassium channels. In the background of the entire system is the all-important sodium-potassium pump, which just keeps the general sodium and potassium gradients intact. All right. So, now I've said action potentials, you just have to believe me, originate somewhere. So now we have to talk about what that is that causes an action potential. So here is where the action potential starts. We call it the axon hillock. Now what is going on? This cell here is receiving neurotransmitters from other cells. Some of those neurotransmitters increase the polarization because they cause the hyperclosing of sodium channels, or they cause maybe the opening of chlorine channels, which also make that the membrane potential is more steep, more negative inside. But we also have neurotransmitters that cause the opening of ligand-gated sodium channels. So at these different locations, we might have the opening and or closing of sodium channels. And it just depends on what is overall winning out. But as soon as we here reach a certain threshold change in the membrane potential, then the action potential takes off. So we can get signals integrated at these various dendrites. It causes some local hyperpolarization or depolarization. The net result is sensed here. as soon as that depolarization is indicated here, we're at a resting potential, and that membrane potential starts to change, first without consequence. A couple of other channels open, no consequence still. A couple more, still nothing. Now suddenly it's enough. When there's enough depolarization for the voltage-gated channels right here at the axon pillar, that's when the action potential there is generated. Then all the sodium channels there start to open and the action potential propagates from here down the axon. So it's an all or nothing effect at the axon pillar, but it allows the cell to integrate a couple of, say, positive acting and negative acting signals. So now you can imagine that if this neuron is in contact with a couple of other neurons that send signals to it, that you can actually generate a signaling signal and a decisions-making circuit. You can imagine. Now, having said that, you might have a feeling you understand how we think. Well, what you have is the cellular basis. We still don't know what a thought is or whatever, right? Or what pain really is. We don't really know that. But it's at least a basis for what is the element of the circuit. Okay, so here it's in words. Yeah, I said that. So all the effects that the cell is receiving here is, you can think, integrated. And what matters is what the sodium channels here, the voltage-gated sodium channels, are sensing in this area. Okay. So, a couple of things now to keep in mind. The sodium and potassium gradients that make all these action potentials and resting potentials possible are maintained by the sodium-potassium pump. And that is a huge deal, and it's consuming 2/3 or so of the energy in a neuron. So it's big, right? But action potentials are very local, and it takes, in any given system, very few ions in order to generate a pretty big magnetic potential. So it takes very small ion currents to generate significant magnetic potential changes. And as a consequence, if we effectively kill the sodium-potassium pump, we can still get a neuron to fire action potentials for several times. Up to the point that essentially the sodium and potassium gradients have been exhausted too much. So if we would throw Urbane at a neuron, we know that in the long run this cell is going to die. The cell will swell and burst because of the Dolan effect. But in the short term, this neuron can actually fire a couple of times. So action potentials are possible because the sodium-potassium pump set up a gradient that's being tapped in for quite a while. The money in the bank is not quickly exhausted. When my salary is cut off, I can still buy stuff. Right? At some point my bank account is empty and then I can no longer buy stuff. It's interesting that if you ever go to the dentist and you get sedated using this stuff, Novocaine, that's a local anesthetic that works by blocking sodium channels in your neurons, in your sensory neurons. So temporarily, those neurons cannot generate action potential, so they don't send anything to the central nervous system. So that's interesting to know. Okay, now, do you believe my story? Yeah, you should. And the reason you should believe my story is that everything going on with neurons, with action potentials, they can actually be measured. So, membrane potentials are nice to study because they can be measured, really. So, you just need a pair of voltmeters. This is one possible setup. So, let's imagine here we have a cell, an axon, and there are certain animals, such as squid, which have very big axons. So they're kind of big. You can punch a needle in there. You can punch an electrode in. So you have one voltmeter and you just put it in the area close to the cell and another electrode, and that's your reference point. And then you can have a second electrode and you can stick it in, and now you have the other electrodes sticking out of the cell, and you can measure the potential difference here between these 2 points. You can just measure voltage, directly measurable. So that's indicated here in these graphs, which I don't care too much about. You can definitely measure these. But there are other ways in which we can measure with a little bit more detail. So if we just go and imagine here we have a cell in cross-section, and we have a reference electrode outside, and now we have an electrode that we can stick in. So just imagine it's in a very narrow pipette, and we have there is actually our electrode, this point here. So all of this section here is in contact. Now we're measuring the voltage difference between inside and outside the cell, this setup that I'm drawing here. But you can change this slightly, and if you actually put this pipette right at the surface of the cell, and you apply an ever so slight vacuum, a very small vacuum, you suck off an individual section of the membrane, or you actually keep the pipette on the top of the membrane. That's depicted here in this little diagram. We have a picture here, phase contrast, where we have a neuron or something like that, and here is a pipette. So it's a piece of glass coming down and it's connecting to the cell surface there. Now, if your pipette is narrow, and if you're lucky enough, you can actually capture an individual ion channel. Capture an individual ion channel which is right here, sealed off from the rest. So you're measuring potential currents, or I should not use the word potential, you're measuring currents through a single channel. So that's possible. And that then means that you can now change actually the potential that you apply. So you can change the voltage that you apply. You can make that positive out or negative out, the way you want. And you can measure the effect of that change in voltage on the current. And equipment is sensitive enough that you can measure, it has long been possible to measure currents through individual channels. And that's how we know that those sodium channels are voltage gated. Because you can set the membrane potential over that piece of membrane to a certain value, and you can measure the current. So you can measure that they are voltage gated, that they close after a while, you can measure their opening time, their closing time, all of those fun things. And you can measure the same thing for sodium channels and potassium channels. All of this can be measured. So, that's good to know. Now, are we having positive feedback yet or not? Can we have your attention for 5 more minutes? Let's see, do we have some questions about this? So knowing to describe what happens in the action potential series, how that is generated, how that is propagated, you should be able to reproduce that as an exam. That would be really, really nice. Okay. Let's see. We might make a start here. We'll just ask the questions. We're now going to look at ion gradients. Okay. So now we have to ask the following questions. Why is the membrane potential what it is? Why is it 70 millivolts for a neuron, and why is it not 200 millivolts or 1 volt? Why not? By the way, 70 millivolts is not a trivial number. It's actually pretty big. Take that for a couple of times, and you have the power that's in the battery. It's not trivial. Then when we think about the nasty transport of glucose over the epithelial cell, which you all answered on Friday, that it took 2 sodium. Why was it 2 sodium? Why not 1? Or why not 3 or more? Why is ATP generated by a mechanism that involves an ion gradient, as we're going to see later for respiration? So to understand this, we need to think about energy, and we need to think about how energy relates to the transport of molecules across membranes. And that is what we are going to do on Wednesday. Positive feedback follows. Enjoy the nice weather.